Hi, everybody. This is Amir and Serena from AF1RealEstateTeam, Royal LePage Signature Realty. And today we will be with Mr. Max Cohen from Cohen Law talking about assignments. We know that many of you are considering an assignment sale. Either you are buying a contract or you are selling one, and there are many questions around assignments, and why not asking them from one of the best lawyers in Toronto and GTA, Mr. Max Cohen. Many people across GTA and Toronto knows you, and for those who don't know you yet, hundreds of realtors and brokerages and consumer know that you are the first choice of lawyer when it comes down to assignments. This is just a general question that everybody's asking. I mean, like, the word assignment is a little bit unfamiliar to people who are thinking about it or planning on purchasing an agreement of purchase and sale, and they want to know what is assignment, like what are assignments?
All right. So at a general level, somebody who buys a condo from a builder usually or almost always enters into an agreement of purchase and sale. And until the deal closes, the original buyer, let's call them the assignor, they have a contract. They have an interest in a contract to acquire a condo, typically, sometimes a house, but almost always a condo. When you do an assignment, you're buying the contract. You're stepping into the shoes of the original buyer and you're saying, I'm going to be the new buyer. I'm going to perform the obligations under the contract, which usually means I'm going to move into the unit. Sometimes it means I'm going to rent it out. And I'm going to pay the builder on closing and during something called the occupancy period, which we can talk about if you like. And so when I'm buying an assignment, I'm not buying the condo or the house just yet. I'm going to be able to buy that at closing from the builder when it's ready. But in the assignment portion, I'm buying the contract and I'm buying the deposits that are sitting with the builder, and I'm buying the right to acquire the unit. And so that contract is fundamental to the transaction because you're not buying a unit yet. The assignor doesn't own a unit yet, a condo or a house. They only have the right to acquire it.
Sure, and thank you for that. Someone else, also a couple of other people asked that I want to buy an assignment. Is there any risks involved with assignment? If I buy an agreement, if I buy the contract, are there any risks involved?
Well, there are always risks when you're doing a purchase or a sale, for that matter, depending on what side you're on. So there are some general transactional risks that aren't really different when you buy a finished product, a resale home or condo versus a new condo. And there are some that are specific to assignments. So some of the general risks, of course, when you buy from a builder is the builder really delays the occupancy. It takes them a long time. It's years after they were supposed to. They may not be a particularly good builder. You may or may not get a great product. Your experience may be great, it may not. So those are what I would describe as general risks of buying from a builder, whether you're the original buyer or the assignee. And, it's just helpful to understand when you're buying an assignment, you're buying from the builder. You're also buying a contract from the assignor, but you're buying the unit from the builder. And so that's the same as, entering into an agreement with a builder for something that's going to be ready way down the road. Now, the risks that are specific to assignments tend to be around the assignor's potential breach of the contract before you ever got involved. So one of the things we find, or in any time you buy from a builder, you don't get the final numbers until about a week before final closing. That's when they produce their statement of adjustments. So why is that relevant? Every now and then when we get the final statement of adjustments from the builder, we find costs on there that really shouldn't be there because they relate to something the assignor did. In one example, the assignor didn't deliver its deposits for like a couple of years. They had a bit of a sweetheart deal that nobody told us about. And so at closing, our buyer was hit with $3,000 of interest charges because they didn't give their deposits. And the builder was okay with it at the time. And by the time we entered the assignment, all the deposits had been paid. They were current at that point, but we got hit with this significant bill. Other times, the assignor may have delivered a deposit check that didn't clear, bounced, and we get hit with the costs for the NSF check that our client didn't deliver. So those are the kinds of risks, and the way we usually deal with those is to make sure that some of the money owed to the assignor is paid at final closing. That even if it's only $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 of their profit, we really want to not deliver it all when the assignment is approved. We want to owe some right to the end, so that if the assignee is hit with a cost that shouldn't be theirs, we have some money that we can use to offset those liabilities.
Sure. I think Serena has a question regarding the adjustments, so probably she has to skip that, but she's going to ask you the question regarding the statement of adjustment at the end. But there is another question that somebody's asking: does the assignor, which is the original buyer, have to pay the land transfer tax when assigning an agreement of purchase and sale?
So there isn't a right legal answer there. And what I mean by that is it's really a negotiated item. I will say that practically, in my experience, the assignee who is stepping into the shoes of the assignor and agreeing to perform the contract, in almost every instance that I can think of, would be the person paying the land transfer tax, not the assignor. The assignee is essentially saying, okay, I'm the buyer now, I'm going to close with the builder, and I'm going to pay all the costs that will be payable at final closing, which would include the land transfer tax. Now, having said that, it is certainly possible for the assignor and the assignee to negotiate something else, where the assignee says, okay, I want you to pay the land transfer tax. In this market, it would seem extremely unlikely to me that an assignor would be willing to do that. But in certain circumstances, there are items of costs that may be negotiated between them. So there's no law that says, the assignee can't require the assignor to pay that. Yes. But it would be pretty unusual.
Yes, and I think you're absolutely right in that sense, because there is a huge shortage of inventory, and assignors are in a very rewarding market. They can pretty much ask anything they wish. I mean, not anything, but you're absolutely right. The other question that many people are asking is that the buyer slash assignee is the buyer slash assignee eligible for HST rebate? And why, I know it's a very broad question, and but like if I buy an assignment, if I buy an agreement at a purchase and sale, and I am the assignee who's buying it, do I have to pay HST?
So the answer to that question has really changed a lot over the last few years. And the answer is going to be a little bit complicated in that the assignee may be eligible for the HST rebate, which I'll talk in more detail about in a moment, but the builder may not give them credit for it on closing. And by that, I mean they might meet the eligibility criteria, but they may have to pay the HST rebate to the builder at closing and then apply to Canada Revenue Agency for a refund. So let's step back a little bit and talk about what is the HST rebate. When you buy a condo or a house from a builder, it's a brand new product, a brand new condo or house, and that has HST. The builder is obligated to charge HST. Now, to incent people to buy and to help the industry, both the Ontario government and the federal government offer buyers a partial refund of the HST. It's to incent people to get into the market and to stimulate buying new housing, because that's good for the economy. That's only a partial rebate of the HST. Now, almost every agreement of purchase and sale with a builder says, hey, we've calculated a price and it includes the HST, but it also includes the HST rebate we're going to get from the government. It's really your rebate, Mr. or Ms. Buyer, but as part of this contract, you're going to assign all of your rights to the rebate to us, and we're going to go collect it from the government at closing. Now, you're also indemnifying us if you're not eligible for the rebate. So if for any reason I, the builder, decide that I'm not sure I'm going to get that money from the government because of the way you're using the property, possibly because you've assigned it, I have the right to charge you the rebate, and you can go and deal with CRA yourself afterwards. If you're eligible, then you convince them you're eligible and get the money back from them. But as the builder, I'm not going to take that risk. Now, the HST rebate is a function of the purchase price, and it's a little complicated because it goes up as the purchase price goes up, but it also goes down as the purchase price goes up. Now, that sounds a little weird, but that's because the federal portion of the rebate hits a maximum when the purchase price, net of all taxes, is $350,000. And then the federal tax starts to drop off. And when the purchase price is higher than $450,000, there's no federal rebate. So the top rebate is around $27,000, $28,000 approximately. But once the purchase price gets above $450,000, it's really $24,000. I know I've given you a lot of information there, but that's kind of what you're talking about.
They lose almost $3,000.
The federal portion disappears. It wasn't even there. It wasn't calculated there in the first place if the price was above $450,000, so it's not really an issue. But if you're buying in that sweet spot, if the unit you're buying might be priced around $350,000, well, by the time of closing, it could be worth more. It can be a little complicated. So it's not the easiest figure to calculate. There's no single percentage to apply. It requires a bit of calculation. But it's around somewhere between $22,000 and $27,000. And at closing, what we're finding now is most builders' lawyers are saying, we'll approve the assignment, but we are not going to be giving the assignee credit for the HST rebate, meaning they will have to pay it at closing and get it back from the government if they're eligible. Now, how do you become eligible? Well, you move into the unit and live there as your primary residence, and you're the first person to move in and live in the unit. Or you are a landlord. You rent it out to somebody, which means you pay the builder at closing, and you apply to the government as a landlord for a refund of the HST rebate. The only challenge with that landlord criteria, Amir, is there's one additional factor that CRA looks at, and that's the current fair market value of the property. So if you bought a property from the builder for $325,000 or $350,000, you probably paid pretty high HST rebate, around $27,000, $28,000. When you apply to get the money back as a landlord, they'll say, well, what's it worth now? And the best indication of what it's worth is maybe what you paid for the assignment. Yes. And that might be $450,000 or $500,000 or $600,000 today. And the government says, oh, well, at that price, there is no federal HST rebate. So you're going to lose about $3,000 there, $3,500, something like that. But you would be eligible for the provincial portion back, which is the higher portion.
And nobody can lie to the government, can they?
Sure, we've tried. It's, we've estimated the value of the property low, but we have found in the last few years, CRA calls us and says, hey, we've looked at some comparables and they look a lot higher than what you suggested it's worth, Mr. Cohen. So how did you value that? And then it's a little bit hard to defend sometimes. So, they have the right to say, we don't agree with the value you put on it. We've got some evidence to say it's worth more.
Oh, I see. Thank you so much. The other question is that if I am not closing directly with the builder, because I'm a buyer, I'm an assignee, and I'm not closing directly with the builder, and I'm buying the agreement of purchase and sell from the assignor, how can I make sure that the builder has been paid in full?
So you probably, just to address the premise there, I'm not sure I agree entirely with the premise. The assignee is closing with the builder. Once the builder approves the transaction, you are now the buyer and you are closing the transaction with the builder. The assignor is almost out of the picture as far as the builder is concerned. They're dealing with the assignee and the assignee's lawyer now, and that's who's going to close the deal with the builder. But the other part of your question is, well, how do you confirm that the agreement was in good standing?
Yeah.
Now, usually, in almost all instances where approval is required, and when you're buying from a builder, they always maintain the right to approve the transaction. The builder will require both the assignor and the assignee to enter into another separate agreement, also called an assignment agreement.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't deal with the assignment price. It doesn't deal with how the assignor or the assignee is paying the assignor. They don't care about any of that. That's between the assignor and the assignee. But they have their own form of agreement that says what the terms of the assignment are that they're willing to approve. And usually it says the assignor is still on the hook. They're still liable if the assignee doesn't close. They're kind of like a guarantor. And it usually indicates that the agreement is in good standing. Now, again, you have circumstances like the one I mentioned earlier in our conversation, where you find just before closing that at some point the assignor wasn't in good standing. They didn't pay their deposits on time, or the check was returned for non-sufficient funds. At one point, they might have not been in good standing, and there are some costs or consequences that arise from that. But they're in good standing at the time that the assignment agreement is entered into. So I have to say it's pretty tough to get the kind of confirmation you're suggesting from a builder to say, hey, everything's in good standing, you won't be hit with any charges, all is right with this contract. We have found most builders take the view, look, we're not here to vouch for the assignor. You do your own due diligence, protect yourself. That's your obligation as an assignee. We're simply here to deliver a product, and this is the terms under which we're prepared to approve this transaction. We're not here to make any representations to you on behalf of the assignor. This is not, we're not doing them a favor.
Yes, sure. I think Serena has a question. You partially answered, I think, big chunk of the question, but Serena will read the question.
Okay, someone asked a question. I just rephrased it, but they want to know about, does the assignor have to represent that the closing adjustments will not exceed the certain amount?
So that's a good question. It's a negotiated item, Serena. In some cases, we do, as an assignee or assignee's lawyer, ask for a representation saying, hey, this will be the maximum of the adjustments. And often that cap applies to certain adjustments, things like development charges, education levies, parkland levies, possibly meter installation. Those kinds of charges that can have a really big cost and aren't usually quantified in the agreement. And so sometimes the assignee will say, hey, Mr. or Ms. Assignor, I want you to tell me that what the maximum is. And if it's more than that, you're responsible for that. It's going to come out of the profit, and I'm going to deduct it from the payment that I make to you at final closing, which is part of the reason it's always important to have some amount of money owed at final closing. Now, most assignors are reluctant to make that representation. Most of them would say, hey, I'm not going to go on the hook for what the builder might charge you. This is the contract I've got. I have no intention of taking on that kind of liability because I have no control over it. It's the builder who's going to charge that. Where we do see some assignors willing to make the representation is when there is an amendment or an addendum to the agreement that caps those specific costs at a certain amount. And then they will often say, look, I represented this to you. I induced you to take this assignment because of this cap that I negotiated. I made it a selling feature, so I'm prepared to stand behind it because it was part of what I sold you. And I kind of told you, hey, you should buy my unit because I negotiated a cap on these costs. Yeah. So it won't be more than that. That's when we find assignors more willing to stand behind the contract.
Yes.
So it really makes sense, as you mentioned, to owe some money on closing to the assignor, not to get hit with surprises.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a lot of money, it is in the assignee's interest to owe some money. And on the flip side, we've had some assignors that say, look, I'm assigning this early. This isn't going to go into occupancy for another year, and it may be another year after that before it closes. I don't want to wait around for 2 more years or 18 months for my money. I'm willing to take a little bit less, but I want to get paid now. And you take your chances, Mr. Assignee or Ms. Assignee. You deal with the builder, but I want all my money now, and I'm gone, and I'm not leaving anything on the table. And, I might even take a little bit less just to have an assignee who can give me that money. Many assignees can't pay that kind of money up front, particularly if they're first-time buyers in the market. They may be planning on getting a high ratio mortgage at, with a only 5 or 10% down.
Yes.
And so they don't have the liquidity, the available cash to pay the profit and pay back the deposits to the assignor until final closing when they get their mortgage money. And so sometimes you have a mismatch between the objectives of the assignor, when they want to get paid, how much risk they're prepared to take on, versus the financial resources of the assignee. Sometimes those two just don't match up, and you need to find a better buyer for that seller.
Sure. You also wanted to, before the end of the meeting, wanted to just briefly talk about the occupancy period. Like, what is occupancy period? And it's people always ask about what is an occupancy period, and like what's involved during the occupancy period.
Right. So when you're building a multi-unit building, a high-rise building, some units are ready long before others. And generally speaking, logically, the units on the lower floors tend to be ready before the units on the upper floors, because you kind of build in sequence from the ground up. Builders in Toronto in particular, elsewhere as well, but it does seem to be very much a GTA phenomenon. Their view is, as soon as your unit is ready to be lived in, your floor is done, your unit is what's known as substantially complete. Now, that may not be 100% complete. There may still be some work that needs to get done, but the work that needs to get done is relatively minor, and the unit is ready to be lived in. It's got bathrooms and kitchens, and it's painted, and somebody can live there, even if there is some finishing that needs to happen or some appliances that need to come in. The builder can force and will force the buyer to take occupancy, to move in and take possession of the property because it's ready to be lived in. Now, unfortunately for the builder, they can't give the buyer title yet. They can't give the buyer title until the whole project is complete and the condominium has been registered. And so they aren't able to register the condo until the whole condo is substantially complete, not just one unit. So the builder says, all right, you have to move in and take possession or occupancy of your unit because it's ready. And since I can't give you title, you're not going to pay me yet. But you are going to start paying some of the costs associated with owning the unit. You're going to pay the estimated common expenses or maintenance fees. And you're going to pay the estimated property taxes. And I use the word estimated because there are no property taxes yet. It doesn't exist as a unit. And there aren't even really common expenses yet because there isn't a condo corporation yet, but they do an estimate. The other thing that you're going to pay as the buyer is interest or notional interest on the balance that you still owe the builder, because they've given you physical possession of the property, but you haven't paid them yet. Now, that interest is based on a government prescribed rate that changes every few months, but right now it's around 3% a year. And these three components form what's known as the occupancy fees. It's a kind of a rent. It doesn't apply to the final purchase price. It's not a credit you get on closing. You're paying rent until the builder can close and give you title. And that's when you would pay them the balance of the purchase price and all the closing adjustments.
And the rent is in addition to the other estimated cost that you just mentioned.
Correct. It's the rent and the occupancy fees are the same thing. It is a notional rent, but it's in addition to the closing adjustments and the purchase price, because for some period of time, you're essentially paying quasi or notional interest, and you're paying for the operating costs as if you owned it.
Sure, sure. Mr. Cohen, thank you so much. We know firsthand your knowledge of real estate transactions is second to none, and we really, really appreciate you spend time with us today. And
we can go on and on and on.
We can go on and on and on, because it's just when it comes down to HST rebates, yes, and talking about HST, there are hundreds and hundreds of different questions. We are really hoping that within the next couple of months or a couple of weeks, you give us the pleasure of being with you again and do another presentation like this, because on a daily basis, believe it or not, many people ask questions regarding assignments. We go to a restaurant with friends. I mean, not now during pandemic, but they talk about assignments. So they say, "Oh, I bought a condo," or "The condo you bought me, I'm assigning it." So if your precious time allows, we would like to have another presentation with you within the next couple of months, hopefully, sometime in spring. So do not forget about us, please.
Well, thank you both for having me, and I'll look forward to meeting with you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. God bless.
Take care.
Bye-bye. It was really good. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.